The night before Christmas, the snow fell softly over Manhattan. Inside a 47th-floor glass office tower near Fifth Avenue, Emily Carter stood alone, staring at the city lights. 3 years ago, she had nothing. No job, no money, no family left, just betrayal. Her ex-husband, Daniel Brooks, had once been her partner in everything, in love, in dreams, and in business. Together, they built a small tech startup from a garage in Brooklyn. She wrote the code. She built the system. She stayed up all night fixing bugs. Daniel handled investors, meetings, and charm. Then one winter morning, just days before Christmas, Daniel walked into their office with a smile that felt wrong. He told her the board had voted her out. Her own company, her shares, diluted, her name, removed, her access, locked, and the worst part, he had secretly married Victoria Hale, the daughter of billionaire investor Richard Hale, just 2 months earlier. The same investor who suddenly saved the company with a massive cash injection. Emily realized too late. She wasn't pushed out because she failed. She was removed because she was in the way. The company she built exploded in value within a year. Government contracts, defense AI systems, smart surveillance technology. The valuation crossed £350 million after a UK expansion deal. Daniel became a media darling. Victoria became the glamorous tech queen. They bought a mansion in the Hamptons and appeared on magazine covers smiling like royalty. And Emily, she packed her things into 2 suitcases and left New York without telling anyone where she was going. Everyone thought she disappeared, but she didn't disappear. She learned. In a quiet town outside Boston, she worked under a different name. She freelanced. She studied financial law. She studied corporate takeover structures. She built connections quietly. She watched. For 3 years, she tracked every move Daniel's company made. She knew their weaknesses better than anyone. Because she built the foundation. She discovered something interesting. The £350 million valuation wasn't as solid as it looked. The company depended heavily on one classified government AI system, a system built on Emily's original core algorithm. An algorithm she never fully handed over. A silent flaw sat buried deep in the architecture. Not a virus, not a legal code, just a dependency, a master authentication key structure only she fully understood. If that key failed, the entire system would freeze worldwide. And the government contracts would collapse. Emily never used it. She wasn't reckless. Instead, she waited, and then fate handed her the perfect gift. 2 weeks before Christmas, financial news leaked that Hale Global Holdings, Richard Hale's investment empire, was struggling. Several overseas investments were under investigation. Liquidity issues, quiet panic behind closed doors. Daniel's company relied on Hale Global for credit lines. Without Hale backing them, their stock would crash. Emily smiled for the first time in years. She had spent the last year building her own quiet investment network. Anonymous partners, offshore capital, strategic allies who didn't care about drama, only profit. She formed a private acquisition entity in London. No one knew she was behind it. And then, on December 20th, while Daniel and Victoria were hosting their luxury Christmas charity gala in Manhattan, Emily made her move. Her entity began buying large portions of Hale Global's distressed debt. Fast, aggressive, silent. By December 23rd, she controlled enough debt leverage to trigger a restructuring vote. Richard Hale had no idea who was behind it. Daniel had no idea the woman he betrayed was about to own the empire that once crushed her. Snow continued to fall across New York. Inside the gala, champagne glasses clinked. Cameras flashed. Victoria laughed under a crystal chandelier. Daniel stood on stage giving a speech about innovation, trust, and loyalty. Emily watched the livestream from a quiet London apartment. Her phone buzzed. Debt position secured. She whispered softly, "Merry Christmas." And that was just the beginning. The next morning, December 24th, the headlines began to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, just small financial notes buried on page 6 of business reports. Hale Global debt restructuring vote expected. Daniel didn't notice at first. He was busy preparing for a Christmas Day interview on a national morning show. Victoria was planning a holiday photo shoot in their Manhattan penthouse. The world still saw them as untouchable. But inside Hale Global's executive offices, the mood had changed. Richard Hale hadn't slept. His legal team kept repeating one sentence. We don't know who controls the majority debt position. Anonymous entities had acquired massive chunks of their liabilities in less than 72 hours. It was precise, surgical. Someone knew exactly which bonds to buy and when to buy them. And they were pushing for a restructuring vote. If it passed, Hale Global would lose control of several assets, including its controlling interest in Daniel's tech company. That afternoon, Emily held a private video call with her legal team in London. She looked calm, composed, different from the woman who once cried alone in a Brooklyn apartment 3 years ago. Are we ready? She asked. Yes, her lead attorney replied. Once the vote is triggered, Hale Global will have two options. Inject emergency capital they don't have, or surrender equity control. And when they surrender, you become majority stakeholder. Emily nodded slowly. She wasn't attacking Daniel's company directly. She was removing the throne from under him. Christmas Eve night arrived. Snow covered the streets of Manhattan like a soft white blanket. Families gathered. Churches filled. Lights glowed in apartment windows. Inside the Brooks penthouse, Victoria scrolled through social media, smiling at comments praising their charity gala. Daniel stood by the window holding a glass of whiskey, watching the snow fall. His phone rang. He frowned at the unknown international number. He answered. Daniel Brooks. A calm female voice responded. Merry Christmas, Daniel. His hand froze. He knew that voice. Emily. Silence filled the room. Victoria looked up, confused. Daniel stepped into his office and shut the door. What do you want? He asked quietly. Emily's voice was steady, almost gentle. I wanted to wish you happy holidays. You disappear for 3 years and call me on Christmas Eve. I didn't disappear, she replied. I was rebuilding. Daniel's jaw tightened. Rebuilding what? A future you can't take from me. He laughed nervously. You're still bitter. No, she said softly. I'm patient. There was a pause. Then she added, check tomorrow's restructuring vote. The line went dead. Daniel stood frozen for a full minute. Then he called Richard Hale immediately. But Richard didn't answer, because at that exact moment, Hale Global's emergency board meeting was in chaos. The restructuring vote had passed. Majority debt holders, led by Emily's acquisition entity, had exercised their rights. Hale Global would be forced to convert debt into equity. And the controlling interest in Daniel's £350 million company would transfer to the new majority stakeholder. Unknown. Anonymous. Until paperwork was finalized. Christmas morning. Instead of holiday joy, Daniel woke to 23 missed calls. His CFO sounded terrified. Hale Global lost controlling interest. Our credit line is frozen. We need an emergency board session immediately. Victoria burst into the room holding her phone. What is happening? My father won't answer. Daniel turned on the financial news channel. And there it was. Breaking headline. Anonymous London investment firm takes control of Hale Global assets in Christmas Eve restructuring shock. He felt something cold settle in his stomach. 3 hours later, Daniel walked into his company's headquarters. The boardroom was tense. Lawyers. Executives. Silence. Then the door opened. A legal representative entered carrying official documents. We represent the new majority stakeholder. Daniel stood up. Who? The man placed a folder on the table. Carter Global Technologies. Daniel's face drained of color. Emily Carter. Her full legal name printed clearly across the acquisition documents. Victoria's father had unknowingly handed control to the very woman they pushed out. But Emily wasn't done, because she didn't want revenge built on destruction. She wanted something stronger. Control. That evening, she landed in New York quietly. No press. No announcement. She checked into a hotel under her real name for the first time in 3 years. The next morning, December 26th, she walked into the same glass tower where she had once been escorted out. This time, security stepped aside. The receptionist looked stunned. Daniel was already waiting in the boardroom. Victoria wasn't there. Richard Hale wasn't there. Just Daniel. He looked older. Tired. Emily entered calmly, wearing a simple dark coat. No anger in her eyes. Only certainty. You planned this, Daniel said. Yes. For 3 years. Yes. You could destroy everything. She sat across from him. I could, she said quietly. But I won't. He blinked, confused. I'm restructuring the company, she continued. Government contracts remain. Employees keep their jobs. Expansion continues. Daniel stared at her. Then what do you want? She leaned forward slightly. I want accountability. She slid another document across the table. Forensic audit findings. Daniel opened it. His face tightened. The report detailed financial manipulations from the early days of the company. Share dilution tactics. Undisclosed marital conflicts of interest. Board vote irregularities. Legal, but unethical. She spoke softly. You didn't just betray me. You erased me. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. It was business. No, she replied. It was greed. Outside the window, snow began falling again. Soft. Quiet. Like 3 years ago. But everything had changed. She stood up. As of today, I resume position as Chief Executive Officer. Daniel looked at her. And me. You remain, she said calmly. Under review. He laughed bitterly. You're enjoying this. She paused at the door. I'm not enjoying it, she said. I'm correcting it. And that wasn't even the part that hurt him most. Because 2 days later, Victoria discovered something far worse. Emily had quietly negotiated a clause in the restructuring agreement. If any previous executive was found guilty of ethical violations, their personal shares could be legally reclaimed under fiduciary breach terms. Daniel's personal wealth was heavily tied to those shares. The same shares that made him powerful. And as investigators began reviewing early documentation, pressure built. Media began asking questions. Investors grew nervous. Victoria's social circle went silent. And on New Year's Eve, while fireworks exploded above Times Square, Daniel sat alone in his office staring at a resignation letter he hadn't signed yet. Across the city, Emily stood on a rooftop terrace overlooking Manhattan. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't celebrating. She was simply breathing. Because revenge, she realized, wasn't about pain. It was about balance. Her phone buzzed. A message from her legal team. Preliminary audit complete. Evidence confirmed. She closed her eyes slowly. The final move was now hers to make. Snowflakes landed softly on her coat as midnight approached. 3 years of silence. 3 years of strategy. 3 years of rebuilding. All leading to this moment. But the real question wasn't whether she could destroy Daniel. The real question was, would she? Midnight struck. Fireworks exploded over Times Square, bright colors flashing across the cold New York sky. Crowds cheered. Music echoed between buildings. A new year began. Emily stood still. Her phone glowed in her hand. The audit files were open. Every page told the same story: calculated manipulation, legal gray zones, ethical betrayal. Daniel had never technically broken the law. He had just bent it until it nearly snapped. She closed the file. Across the city, Daniel finally signed the resignation letter. He didn't send it yet. He just stared at his name at the bottom of the page. 3 years ago, he felt powerful removing Emily. Now he understood something terrifying: power borrowed from the wrong people never truly belongs to you. The first week of January hit like a storm. Financial analysts began dissecting the Hale Global collapse. News outlets dug into Daniel's company history. Old interviews resurfaced, clips where he claimed to be the sole visionary founder. Employees whispered in hallways. Some remembered Emily, the quiet genius, the one who actually built the system. The board scheduled an emergency public announcement. Cameras filled the lobby on January 5th. Daniel stood behind the podium one last time. His voice was steady, but his eyes looked hollow. Due to restructuring and in the best interest of the company, I am stepping down as CEO effective immediately. Reporters shouted questions. Is this connected to Hale Global? Is there internal misconduct? Did your former co-founder have anything to do with this? Daniel paused. For a second, his pride fought back. Then he said quietly, the company will be in capable hands. He stepped away. And as he did, Emily walked onto the stage. The room fell silent. Flashes exploded as cameras captured her face, the woman no one had seen in years. She didn't smile widely. She didn't gloat. She simply spoke. This company was built on innovation, integrity, and long nights of belief. We will return to those values. Her voice carried calm authority. Employees will remain protected. Contracts remain secure. But accountability matters. The message was clear. Stability. But change. Markets reacted positively. Investors liked confidence. Stock stabilized within days. Inside the building, Emily began restructuring leadership. Not aggressively, strategically. She promoted engineers who had been overlooked. She reinstated ethical compliance protocols. She restored her original development team members where possible. But then came the harder part. The legal committee concluded its internal review. While Daniel's actions had been technically within corporate maneuvering rules, the conflict of interest disclosures involving Victoria and her father had not been properly declared during the original board vote 3 years ago. That single violation opened a door. Emily could pursue civil action. If she did, Daniel's personal fortune, valued at nearly £120 million in shares and bonuses, could be frozen during litigation. Victoria stormed into Daniel's temporary apartment one evening, furious. "My father is being investigated. Our accounts are under review. This is because of her." Daniel sat quietly on the couch. "She warned me," he said. Victoria's voice cracked. "Then fight her." He looked up slowly. "I already lost." Meanwhile, Emily met privately with Richard Hale. The once powerful billionaire looked smaller somehow. The sharp confidence was gone. "You could have crushed me," he admitted. "I still can," Emily replied evenly. "Then why haven't you?" She studied him for a moment. "Because destruction is easy. Correction is harder." Richard leaned back in his chair. "What do you want?" "Public acknowledgement," she said. "A statement correcting the founding narrative. My name restored legally and historically. And full cooperation with compliance investigations." Richard hesitated. Pride battled practicality. Finally, he nodded. Within 48 hours, a formal press release shocked the tech world. Emily Carter recognized as original lead architect and co-founder. Old articles were updated. Company websites revised. Archived interviews amended. Her erasure was undone. But Daniel's internal collapse was just beginning. He watched the news from his apartment, feeling something unfamiliar, not anger. Regret. He remembered the nights in the garage. The cheap pizza. The excitement when their first prototype worked. He remembered loving her. And he remembered choosing ambition over loyalty. One snowy afternoon, he requested a meeting. Emily agreed. They met in the same boardroom where she had reclaimed control weeks earlier. No lawyers. No cameras. Just them. "You won," Daniel said quietly. She shook her head. This was never about winning. Then what was it about? Truth. He swallowed. "I didn't think you'd come back." "I didn't either," she admitted softly. Silence lingered between them. "I was scared," Daniel confessed. "Scared investors wouldn't take us seriously. Scared I'd lose everything. So you made sure I lost everything instead," she replied. He didn't argue. "Because it was true. I loved you," he said suddenly. She met his eyes calmly. "I know." That hurt him more than anger would have. Weeks passed. Legal pressure mounted, but Emily made a surprising decision. She declined to pursue personal asset seizure against Daniel. Her board objected. "You're leaving money on the table," one advisor warned. She responded firmly, "We're rebuilding a reputation, not running a revenge auction." Instead, Daniel agreed to a settlement. He surrendered a significant portion of his remaining shares voluntarily. He issued a public apology acknowledging unethical decisions. He stepped away from executive leadership permanently. Victoria left the country quietly. The marriage, strained by scandal and collapsing wealth, did not survive the year. Spring approached. Snow melted from New York sidewalks. Inside the company, something unexpected happened. Productivity increased. Employee morale improved. Investors regained confidence. Emily introduced a new AI ethics division, one focused on transparency and oversight. Government agencies responded positively. Contracts expanded. By mid-year, the company's valuation surpassed its previous £350 million. But this time, the foundation was solid. One evening, nearly a year after her return, Emily visited the old Brooklyn garage. It had been converted into a small art studio. She stood outside, smiling faintly. That was where everything began. Not with greed, not with power, but with belief. Her phone buzzed again. A message from a young female engineer within the company. Thank you for showing us that integrity wins. Emily stared at the words for a long time. Integrity wins. She realized something important. Revenge had never truly been her goal. Control had been step 1. Restoration step 2. But legacy. Legacy was the real victory. Across the city, Daniel now worked quietly as a consultant for small startups. No spotlight. No glamour. Just experience. One afternoon, he sent Emily a short email. I hope you build something greater than we ever imagined. She read it, then replied with just 3 words. I already am. Years later, business schools would study the Hale Global collapse as a case of overleveraged ambition. They would study Emily Carter's silent acquisition strategy as a masterclass in patience and leverage. But the part they would never fully understand was this. The most powerful revenge is not destruction. It is becoming untouchable. On another Christmas Eve, years after the chaos, snow fell gently over Manhattan again. Emily stood in her office, now permanently hers. City lights reflected against the glass. She wasn't thinking about Daniel anymore. She wasn't thinking about betrayal. She was thinking about expansion into new global markets. About mentorship programs. About innovation that could change lives. Her assistant knocked softly. Car service is here. She nodded. As she stepped toward the elevator, she glanced once at the skyline. 3 years of silence had built an empire. But it wasn't the money. Not the £350 million. Not the headlines. It was the simple truth. No one could erase her again. And as the elevator doors closed, the city lights flickered like quiet applause. The story could have ended with revenge. But it ended with power earned, not stolen. And that made all the difference. The next year brought something Emily had not expected. Peace. Not the loud kind. Not fireworks or headlines. But the quiet kind that settles in your chest when you no longer wake up angry. The company expanded into Europe carefully, this time without risky debt structures. London became their international hub. Berlin followed. Then Toronto. Every decision passed through ethical review. Every major contract required transparency clauses. Investors began calling her the steady architect. She didn't correct them. One afternoon in early December, almost 4 years since the betrayal, Emily received an invitation. Harvard Business School wanted her to speak about strategic patience in hostile corporate environments. She almost laughed at the title. Strategic patience. If only they knew how many nights she cried alone before patience turned into strategy. She accepted. The lecture hall was full. Students leaned forward, notebooks open. She told them about leverage. About debt acquisition. About corporate voting structures. But then she said something unexpected. Revenge is emotional. Strategy is mathematical. Never confuse the two. A student raised his hand. Did you ever want to destroy him? The room grew quiet. Emily thought carefully. Yes, she answered honestly. For a while. And what stopped you? She paused. Understanding that destruction ties you to the past. Control frees you from it. The room stayed silent long after she finished. Back in New York, something else was unfolding. Daniel had kept his distance for over a year. No public comments. No interviews. He worked quietly, advising small founders who couldn't afford big consultants. He changed. The arrogance was gone. The hunger for headlines had faded. One snowy evening, he found himself walking past the old glass tower. He stopped across the street, looking up. The top floor lights were still on. He didn't go inside. He just stood there for a long moment before turning away. Inside that same building, Emily reviewed a confidential report. A competitor was attempting an aggressive acquisition of a smaller AI ethics firm, one Emily had been mentoring quietly. The tactics felt familiar. Hostile board manipulation, debt pressure, silencing original founders, history trying to repeat itself. Her jaw tightened. She scheduled a meeting immediately. Within 48 hours, Carter Global Technologies outbid the competitor, not with hostility, but with partnership terms that protected the original founders' control. The young CEO of the smaller firm sat across from Emily, eyes wide. You didn't have to save us, he said. She looked at him steadily. Yes, I did. Because this wasn't just business anymore. It was principle. Word spread quietly in the startup world. If you built something real, and someone tried to erase you, Emily Carter would not ignore it. Her reputation evolved again, from strategist to protector. But power always attracts tension. Late one night, her head of security knocked on her office door. "There's an issue." A private equity group was investigating old patents, including the original algorithm Emily designed in the Brooklyn garage. They were looking for technical vulnerabilities to exploit for licensing challenges. Legal warfare. Emily smiled slightly. Let them try. She had spent years rebuilding not just control, but protection. Her intellectual property portfolio was airtight now. International filings, defensive patents, legal fortification in every major market. She wasn't the vulnerable coder anymore. She was fortified. Still, something tugged at her. Not fear. Reflection. She opened an old folder saved on a personal drive. Photos from the garage days. Young Daniel smiling, holding a circuit board. Her laughing, hair tied back, grease on her hands. For a moment, sadness touched her. Not for the betrayal, but for what they could have been. Then she closed the folder. Some chapters are meant to end. Christmas approached again. The city decorated itself in gold lights and red ribbons. This time, Emily hosted a company-wide holiday event, not at a luxury hotel, but inside the main development floor. Engineers, assistants, janitors, executives, all together. No VIP section. No velvet ropes. She stood on a small stage and spoke briefly. 4 years ago, I lost everything I thought defined me. Today, I stand here knowing titles and valuations don't define us. Integrity does. Applause filled the room. Not forced. Not polite. Genuine. After the event, she stayed late, walking through the now empty office floors. Snow began falling outside the windows again. Her assistant approached carefully. "There's someone downstairs asking to see you." Emily frowned slightly. "At this hour?" "He says it's important." She nodded. Minutes later, Daniel stood inside her office for the first time since his resignation. He looked different again. Older. But steadier. "I won't take much of your time," he said. She gestured for him to sit. He remained standing. "I'm starting a nonprofit," he continued. "For founders who get pushed out unfairly. Legal support. Education. Protection." She studied him quietly. "That's unexpected. I know what it feels like now," he admitted. To lose everything. She didn't correct him by pointing out he hadn't lost everything the way she had. Instead she asked, "Why tell me?" "Because I learned something from you," he said. Silence hung between them. "You taught me that power without ethics collapses," he finished. Snow tapped softly against the glass behind her. She nodded once. "That's a good lesson." He hesitated. "I don't expect forgiveness." "You don't need it," she replied calmly. He looked surprised. "I let go a long time ago," she added. That seemed to hit him harder than anger ever could. He gave a small nod. "Merry Christmas, Emily." "Merry Christmas, Daniel." He left quietly. She stood alone again in the office. But this time, the silence felt different. Complete. Years ago, she wanted revenge worth £350 million. Now she understood something deeper. The money was never the real number. The real value was reclaiming her name. Her voice. Her identity. The next morning, a global business magazine released its annual list of most influential leaders. Emily Carter ranked in the top 10. The article headline read, "She was erased. Now she writes the rules." She didn't frame the magazine. She placed it in a drawer. Because influence wasn't about covers. It was about systems. In the following months, Carter Global launched an initiative funding women in tech, minority founders, and ethical AI research. Quietly. No flashy marketing campaign. Just action. One evening, while reviewing expansion proposals, her CFO looked up. "You know, you could have walked away rich and disappeared." She smiled faintly. "I didn't want to disappear." He nodded thoughtfully. "No one could erase you now." She leaned back in her chair, watching the city lights again. "No," she said softly. "They can't." Outside, New York buzzed with life. Inside, a woman who once stood broken in the snow now stood unshakable. Not because she destroyed her enemy, but because she outgrew him. The final irony. The company's valuation eventually crossed £500 million. Higher than it had ever been under Daniel's leadership. Yet she never once mentioned the old number again. £350 million. It had once represented betrayal. Now it was just a milestone buried in history. On another quiet December night, as snow fell gently over Manhattan once more, Emily turned off the lights in her office and stepped into the elevator. The glass doors reflected her image back at her. Stronger, wiser, untouchable. The elevator descended slowly toward the lobby. Not toward revenge, not toward anger, but toward a future no one else controlled. And as the doors opened to the softly lit lobby, she walked forward without looking back. Because the greatest revenge had already been completed. She became the empire they tried to deny her. Years passed. The headlines faded. The scandal became a case study. The anger became memory. Hale Global didn't just grow, it stabilized industries. Governments consulted them on ethical AI standards. Universities partnered with them. Young founders quoted Emily in interviews without even realizing the full story behind her name. And Daniel, his nonprofit, quietly helped dozens of founders avoid the mistakes he once made. He never returned to the spotlight. He didn't try to rebuild fame. He rebuilt character. They rarely crossed paths after that winter night. Not because of tension, but because some stories don't need extra chapters. One final Christmas Eve, nearly a decade after the betrayal, snow fell heavier than usual over Manhattan. Emily stood once again by the glass window of her office, the same view, the same city, but a completely different life. Her phone buzzed with a message from a junior engineer. "Thank you for fighting for what's right. Because of you, I never felt invisible." Emily read it twice. Invisible. That word used to define her. Erased from press releases. Removed from boards. Written out of her own creation. Now it defined no one under her leadership. She picked up a small framed photo from her desk, not of awards, not of magazines, but of that old Brooklyn garage. Dusty shelves. Tangled wires. A folding table covered in early prototypes. Where it all began. Not with revenge. Not with money. But with belief. She set the frame back down and turned off the office lights. The elevator doors closed softly behind her. In the lobby, employees laughed as they headed home to families. No fear, no whispered tension, just normal life. Outside, the snow continued falling, quiet and steady, just like the night she lost everything. But this time, she wasn't standing alone in shock. She was walking forward in control. £350 million had once been the symbol of her betrayal. In the end, it became irrelevant. Because the real victory was never about the money. It was about reclaiming her name, her voice, her power, and proving that the strongest revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so powerful, so grounded, and so undeniable, that no one can ever erase you again. The city lights reflected against the snow-covered streets as she stepped into her car. The past stayed behind the glass tower. The future waited ahead, and this time, she owned it completely. The end.